Welcome to the Wirecard Saga, Season 2, Lies, Spies, and Corporate Crimes.
Mikhail Ryder-Gordon, Managing Director of Institutional Ethics and Integrity at Affiliated Monitors. Over this podcast series, we're going to take a deep dive into the Wirecard Saga to see where it may take us literally across the globe.
The Wirecard Saga is a production of the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. First, a quick word from our sponsor, and then we'll hear from Mikhail.
Guten Morgen, Deutschland und Österreich. And hello, listeners in the UK, US, France, India, Japan, Australia, around the world. New and exciting developments ahead. Welcome to Season 2, Lies, Spies, and Corporate Crimes, the Wirecard Saga. Now, admittedly, I've been away for a time, had a bit of teaching, writing, research to do. And my being away means that we have some catching up to do. And there have been quite a number of developments. Just because the Deutsche Börse shut down the trading of Wirecard shares as of the other day, November 15th, if you're keeping track, it ain't over, baby blue. Oh, it's true, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange revoked the admission of Wirecard shares to the regulated market. This is hardly a surprise. The surprise is they didn't cease trading sooner. After all, Wirecard had already been kicked out of the most important German share index, the DAX. And trading on Germany's Börse Extra electronic trading segment, well, that ended back in January 21, nearly a year ago. Oh, time flies when you're... Really, the bigger question, why was anyone still holding on to their Wirecard shares after all of that? What, last month Wirecard shares were trading at 17 cents? I'm sorry, folks, were you holding because you thought the price would rise? Oh, Toto, I had the worst dream. Yes, it's true. For investors who still have Wirecard shares at the former DAX company in their securities accounts, it has become increasingly difficult to rid themselves of said shares. Investment advisors, yes, they have had a sell advisement for, well, some time. Go figure. But for those holdouts clutching still to their Wirecard AG shares, or clutching their pearls, well, in theory, your shareholdings in the company, despite it being under insolvency administration, remain untouched. It's just that without a platform in which to sell said shares, and in the absence of any trading activity, it is going to be both challenging to offload the shares or even really arrive at a meaningful price. After all, there's still room to fall from the stock's current value of 5 cents. Okay, let's start at a high level, and I'll give you a taste of what's to come over the next few episodes. Now, a couple of spoiler alerts right up front. Cover your ears if you haven't followed the news and you don't want to lose the fun of the shock when I tell you. Okay, ready? Here goes, high level. Former Secretary General of the Austrian Foreign Ministry caught up in slipping chemical weapons formulas. Austrian Chancellor steps down and scandals go up. Austrian intelligence officers filming highly classified documents at home. The Austrian Parliament asked the Ministry of Justice to explain the link between the Austrian FPO and OVP party members who were accepting commissions from Jan Marsalek, tied to Dmitry Firtash's Agency for the Modernization of the Ukraine. Henry O'Sullivan's arrest leads to just more links with dodgy online payment processors, casinos, and shell companies, and opens up some very old, ugly history. More on that later. And a bunch of distant offspring of Friedrich Wilhelm III, King of Prussia, provides links between, of all places, Wirecard Russia and an old scandal in San Marino. EY wants to sue someone, anyone, as everyone is suing them. Braun may be prosecuted in Austria before Germany gets around to bringing their case against him, although possession is 9/10 of the law, is said. And it's confirmed Jan Marsalek knows how to use online banking services. And so much more. This episode, though, It's really all about Wirecard and its executives, call it contributions, to Die Skandalrepublik, or Austria as the rest of us know it. Austria showing its Eastern European antecedents with an astonishing level of political and business corruption and a really stunning set of connections back to Wirecard. So let's start with the unprecedented seizure of an Austrian diplomat's electronic devices, which came on the heels of a highly unusual recall of said official from their post, Johannes Peterlich. Remember way back in Season 1, Episode 7, I told you about Marsalek getting his grubby little hands on the formula for chemical weapon Novichok? And recall intelligence officers from the same unit of Austrian intelligence that were getting access to the financials of online porn site operators via Wirecard were thought to have slipped the Novichok formula out of the back door of the BVK, along with the dossier relating to Russia's Novichok attack on Sergei Skripal. Go back to episode 17 if you've forgotten. Well, it wasn't quite so simple, but as you can imagine, much of the Western intelligence community was a little amped by the fact that it appeared Austria, already with low trust value in the community, had let slip the formula for a deeply difficult-to-detect organophosphate-based weapon known for its deadly effect on humans. Not really the sort of information one wants to see freely available to the keen home chemist. And the dossier? It had information about Western intelligence agencies' information gathering and informants related to the Skripal matter. Well, late last month it emerged that the formula, sourced originally from documents compiled by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, based in Vienna conveniently, came from a slightly unexpected source. Austria's, well, until very recently, relieved of duty October 14th to be precise, Austria's ambassador to Indonesia, Peterlich. Now let's get a little history on Peterlich. From 2018 to 2020, Herr Peterlich, now a guest of Austria's Federal Office for the Prevention of and Fighting Corruption, was the Secretary General at the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Prior to that, he was Deputy Director General of Cultural Policy at the same said ministry. He served a Chief of Staff role at a lesser ministry, even served as Austria's Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to Thailand, also handling the Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar desks from 2009 to 2013. He started with the Foreign Ministry back in 1994, even served as a spokesperson for an OVP State Secretary and subsequent Foreign Minister. You might say, an illustrious career in service to his country. Or not. Only, before the BAK officers met Herr Peterlich on the tarmac of Flughafen Wien, liberating his laptop mobile and several USB sticks from his person, even before then, it transpires Peterlich had been under investigation for treason. Oh, yes. Specifically, since 2017, he has been under investigation for betraying official and state secrets and engaging in espionage for none other than, wait for it, Russia. Go figure. And it is Herr Peterlich who is believed to have passed along the Novichok formula along with the dossier to another BVT employee, you know the name, Augusto Ott, who handed it on to Marsalek. Let me guess. Boy Blunder tossed the dossier in the nearest bin and went off to lunch to wave the Novichok formula around. Can you just imagine his Russian handlers? Klink, you idiot! We have the formula. We invented it. Where is dossier? Bear want dossier. It is funny in a not humorous way whatsoever that even back in April of this year, the Austrian parliamentary committee that was investigating the Ibiza scandal, when interviewing Julian Hassenthaler, noted the relationship between Austrian Brigadier Gustav Gustenau and his band of merry men, including Gattringer and Claude Müller, who were all working with Marsalek in that Libyan adventure with Russia's Wagner Group. In those hearings, MP David Strogmüller asked Hessenthaler, so Gustenau, he was in the Federal Ministry for National Defense during the time in the FBO-led Ministry for the Security Directorate. Yeah, and Johannes Peterlich, do you know him? By name, says Hessenthaler. Oh, says Strogmüller. Ministry of Foreign Affairs under both FPO and OVP governments, yes? Any perceptions that Peterlich is tied to Russia, or any connections to Wirecard, he asks. Hessenthaler pauses, nods his head, and says, well, yes, based on rumours. Now, just how many rumours did Austrian intelligence need to shut down Peterlich or Ott? Too bad they didn't act before the Skripal dossier was stolen and handed over to the Russians in 2018. See, the Russians don't need the formula, remember, they invented it, but what they really wanted were the files on the Skripal investigation from the OPCW that came with it. How did the BAK come to know about Peterlich passing the classified Duchy on the left-hand side? Ott's mobile. They'd seized Ott's cell phone some time ago, and there for anyone looking were the messages between Ott and Marsalek and Ott and Peterlich. And this is my favourite part. A video related to the handover. Seriously? Ott held on to a video dating back to 2018. Ott had actually filmed the stolen dossier's contents. That's right, Mr. I work in intelligence laid the documents out on a table in his apartment and filmed them. And then, just for good measure, kept the video on his phone. What does one of the acumen tests to join the Austrian intelligence service involve? Like the ability to use the thick crayon? Good grief. Now, Peterlich's phone had already been surreptitiously checked once when he was home on a visit to Vienna in early October of this year. And I don't think it helped his cause that he told the press way back in February that he didn't know Marsalek. Although, in that sense, he did sort of tell the truth when he claimed that he hadn't passed any documents directly to Marsalek. I mean, technically he did pass those state secrets to Ott, who then passed them on to Marsalek. But a little more awkwardly, as if it can't get any more awkward, Peterlich's wife, the Frau Peterlich, or Ria Ursula Peterlich, she worked for the BVT also. Oh, and it gets better. Frau Peterlich's boss at the BVT during those years when her husband was playing fast and loose with classified information? None other than Martin Weiss. You know, responsible for helping Marsalek flee the country back in the summer of 2020. Isn't that cozy? But there are more close relationships. Fräulein Peterlich's papa, Ernst Gabmann, former provincial councillor and airport executive, odd, introduced Martin Weiss to Thomas Schellenbacher, the other half of the bespoke travel agency used by Marsalek. Ironically, Herr Peterlich's boss, ex-OVP Minister Sophie Carmeson, she happened to lose her job a week later for being caught up in former Chancellor Sebastian Kurz's advertising scandal. Isn't it funny the corrupt just seem to gravitate to one another, don't they? And speaking of those spinning out of orbit, Austrian Brigadier Gustav Gustenau has been on a wobbling trajectory since the Wirecard implosion 17 months ago. And earlier this month, he spun out. Or, rather, he was pushed out. That's right, folks. We thought Germany was going to sustain the worst of the Wirecard fallout, but Austria has stolen the crown. Yes, senior BVT officials, a chancellor, oops, spoiler alert, and now one of the country's most senior military officers has been, well, downgraded, so to speak. To keep up our space analogy for another moment, Gustenau may not yet have gone supernova, but the red supergiant is collapsing under his own weight, and supernova isn't long to come. What did Mother tell you about how one is judged by the company one keeps? Marsalic skips along whilst his friends fall from high places and find themselves assigned bunks in Middle Europe's best detention facilities. Gustav was moved to a new vague role at Austria's Defence Academy, some mumblings about research. But this supposedly completely uncorrelated demotion came hot on the heels of Austrian parliamentary inquiries in late October that just kept surfacing his name. That would be because in addition to being palsy with traitors Marsalic and Peterlich, close involvement in that social club that's still going, the Austrian-Russian Friendship Society, as well as a dodgy security company he ran with his wife that seemed to hold some unusual contracts and trips to Russia. Gustenau's only real reassurance to the country that made him and paid him for nearly 40 years was that, hey, at least under his watch, the Austrian Ministry of Defence never paid Marsalic directly. Well, what a patriot you are, Brigadier. Now, charges haven't been filed as yet, but give it time. By the way, happy birthday, Gustenau. You turned 61 the other day. Oh, what a birthday surprise. Putin's wearing Jan's ring. Has the self-immolation by career Austrian politicians run its course? Oh no, the fallout continues. In the course of the Wirecard affair, it became public knowledge that the former head of cabinet of OVP Interior Minister Ernst Strasser and Christopher Ulmer, as well as his deputy at the time, Wolfgang Gattringer, had both been in business relationships with Jan Marsalic and his Wirecard AG as consultants. So, individually to Marsalic, the three of them also held contracts as consultants to Wirecard. Now, in the files of the Ibiza investigation, Austria's Parliamentary Inquiry Committee identified that Gattringer's consulting firm, remember Repuco, had received at least several €100,000 in Austrian public monies, but via some questionable contracts, thanks to the OVP government led by Colonel Kurz. And if you don't remember the downfall of Chancellor Sebastian Kurz, go back to episode 26. What was so questionable about Repuco's contracts? Well, Repuco was the front for Gattringer, and Repuco was billing Wirecard monthly. Remember, this saw Gattringer, Strasser, and Ulmer acting as advisors to Marsalic. But Repuco was also being awarded contracts by the Austrian state for, and listeners, I'm going to make you pick one or more of the following. Ready? A contract from the Austrian Federal Ministry for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology to develop a concept for a training center for counter-terrorist operations, because Repuco was deemed to be the most suitable vendor with security expertise. B, a consultant for software solution tenders to the Austrian Ministry of the Interior. Or C, a process support contract for implementing a long-term climate strategy to the Austrian Ministry of Agriculture, Regions and Tourism. Well, what do you think? If you guessed all three, you win the plush toy. That's right. Under the steady hand of the OVP, Gattringer, wearing his Repuco hat, was awarded all three contracts. So what was it? Bribes being run through the contracts, or laundering to obscure the proceeds of crime? Listeners, what do you think? Do write in and tell. Or is Gattringer just the Swiss Army knife of the consulting world, expert in all things? Now, the fall of Colonel Kurz isn't over. Now, ex-Chancellor Sebastian Kurz couldn't hold on to the chancellorship through so many scandals, many of which share players between them and Wirecard, and all tying back to Kurtz. Now remember, we had the Ibiza affair, and this is really, it's like double jeopardy. Kurtz was toppled once by this scandal, and now it contributes to his toppling again. Go back to earlier episodes where folks from the Ibiza scandal have connections to Wirecard. Add in the Novomatic scandal and casinos case, FPO officials taking bribes from the Austrian gambling sector, and remember, we already have ties via Novomatic back to Wirecard. And then there's what's referred to as the OBAG perjury matter, and a scandal featuring Kurtz's top Justice Ministry officials leaking sensitive investigations information. Another ministry that leaks like a sieve. Now, have any of you read some of Kurtz's text messages, of which there appear to be hundreds, nay thousands, some of which have been released thanks to the press? Those of us fortunate enough to live in countries where we can vote to elect our government representatives, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do so not really expecting our leaders to fill their days on their mobiles, pressing the winking, chortling, smiling emojis, or the heart emojis. Or really, come to think of it, any emojis. We seek a measure of gravitas from our leaders, don't we? I know Kurtz is young, but is that an excuse for carrying on like a sixth former? All right, let's be honest. We're all exceptionally thankful he hasn't or wasn't texting the poo, the angry face with horns, the eggplant, the donut, or banana emojis, but that's not really a high bar to be asked to hurdle, is it? The 5 primary scandals, all with a nexus to Colonel Kurtz, half of which linked to Wirecard, have put the ex-Chancellor on rather thin ice. From the ex-Chancellor to a minister to top officials, numerous high-ranking individuals are currently under investigation in Austria, and several cases are only just now getting underway. Yes, there was the Justice Ministry official, Section Chief Pilnicek, and we'll come back to him in a moment. He was acquitted of charges of violating official secrecy on November 6th, but the verdict's not legally binding. And the Public Prosecutor's Office announced this past Thursday that it would appeal. And you'll see Pilnicek resurface in relation to Wirecard shortly. And on the 16th of November, a subcommittee of the National Council unanimously voted in support of stripping Kurtz of his parliamentary immunity. It was approved, and Wickster is now investigating the once Chancellor, even once Shadow Chancellor. All of this political scandal playing out across the Austrian press and as the country grapples with that devastating fourth wave of COVID. And that has allowed some additional information that has emerged featuring some of our key Austrian government officials linked to the Card and Marsalik and Braun to perhaps go a little under the radar. Let's briefly turn back to those raids Wickster ran in October. Included in the raid was an ex-FPO Member of Parliament, Hans-Jörg Jennewein. Now, Jennewein is said to have received information about the ex-BVT official Augusto Ott, there he is again, getting information since as far back as 2018. And it turns out that information from Ott proved useful to Jennewein as FPO faction leader. So here he sits in a Parliamentary Investigations Committee, ostensibly looking into the misdeeds occurring at the BVT. You know, the agency compromised by Marsalik in Russia. Jennewein is now employed in the FPO and recently supported FPO Parliamentary Group leader Christian Hafnecker in the Parliamentary Committee investigating the Ibiza scandal. Good heavens, this is incestuous. So why did Wickster raid Jennewein's home? Because it isn't clear that information he sought was genuinely being used purely for the purposes of understanding what had gone wrong in the BVT so that Parliament could address the leaks. Testimony from the investigation into the BVT indicates Augusto Ott was paid for classified information he passed along. And that information wasn't just passed to Marsalic and Russia, but to Austrian opposition parties. Oof. Okay, and then remember Martin Weiss, a former BVT intelligence officer compromised by Marsalic, and how he sang under interrogation. And remember two companies, Alexander Vucek's IMS, Capital Partners, Marsalic was silent partner of that one, and Nicholas von Rintelen's Virtual Solutions. They responsible for encrypted communications for the German agencies. Go back to episode 23 if you've forgotten Virtual Solutions. Well, the other week, the Austrian parliamentary inquiry looking into the BVT compromise started asking a few more questions, because in reflecting on Weiss's testimony and the documentation provided by Weiss, it put von Rintelen and Marsalic, via Virtual Solutions, smack in the middle of a greater compromise of Austrian intelligence. Marsalic had helped Weiss get a job with the IMS Capital after he left the BVT. The Austrian MPs pointed to the German IC's report, saying, and that's the investigative committee, remember, we couldn't help but notice Weiss mentioned in our interrogations of him here in Austria the whole Marsalic and von Rintelen buddy-buddy thing, and we're wondering if perhaps the BVT was also using Virtual Solutions for its classified communications. You see, it raises some other very uncomfortable questions. So as that hangs out there, another piece of information emerged. As it transpires, back when Wirecard was still going supernova, January of 2020, there just happened to be a cyber attack on the Austrian Foreign Ministry in January 2020, only months after OVP party member Alexander Schallenberg, responsible for security, gave the all clear on cybersecurity for these agencies. And it transpires that the group responsible for Austria's embassy's internet security at the time was, among others, another company that'll sound familiar to listeners, Cyan AG, owned by none other than Colonel Kurtz's financier, Alexander Schutz. You remember Schutzy, he who was buddy with Marcus Braun. They used to pull their respective yachts up alongside each other in the Med, congratulate with smug, sanctimonious smiles. Schutz, who sat on the Deutsche Bank board, they who gave large loans to Wirecard. And remember, Schutzy got in trouble for suggesting to Braun he bury the Financial Times for the negative coverage of Wirecard. Schutzy, who rents a property to fugitive oligarch Dmitry Firtash in Vienna. You know, the same Firtash whose plane Kurtz flew to Israel earlier this year. There's Schutzy's company, Cyan AG, at the center of information security for Austria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And if all of that isn't sufficient to make one see conspiracy theories and treachery at the hand of a foreign state, Schutzy's wife, Eva Schutz-Heiblinger, was on the supervisory board of OBB Rail Cargo, Austria's rail line. You know, officials from OBB being some of those Marsalic bribed to win contracts for Wirecard. Isn't this cozy? Now, Schutzy is a long-time OVP party donor. After all, he's Kurtz's long-time political financier. And it was announced earlier this year that Schutzy and Eva are bankrolling the digital media and television project called E-Express, a tabloid being co-helmed with Richard Schmidt. Schmidt being tight with former right-wing FPO party apparatchik Christian Strocker. Remember Strocker? Straka, heavily implicated in the Ibiza affair. You're just going to have to go back to earlier episodes and link to Wirecard. Well, conveniently, E-Express has begun running stories suggesting that the Ibiza affair is really nothing more than a stitch-up of our favourite FPO and OVP politicians. So misunderstood. But then, several other editors at E-Express don't come with the most salubrious of ethical records. One editor, tied to the extreme right, has publicly espoused support for private militias and said he was prepared to wage war if Trump wasn't re-elected in the US. Huh? You do know you're Austrian, right? Different country? Wrong election? Good grief. Don't they teach civics these days? I don't know. And yet others on staff of the Express have also been cited for violating media ethics rules. Well, a few weeks ago, Wixter served search warrants on the Vienna office of the OVP, the Chancellery, when Kurtz was there, and the Ministry of Finance. Now, subsequently, a kerfuffle between E-Express and another journalist and Wixter ensued, and I won't go into that in this show, but the scurrilous invectives and much finger-pointing does make for some lurid reading. I highly recommend it. Okay, so with all of that circus going on, let's take a moment to look again at von Rintelen and go back to episode 23 if you forgot some of the good stuff about him. Now, why are we revisiting Nicholas von Rintelen, or Nicky as we'll call him? Because yet more links to other bank scandals tied to Wirecard, Marsalek and his buddies, and the Russians, so tiresome, all come back to Nicky. This truly does have its roots in history. Now, think Soterbank and FBME bank links. Similarly, there were a series of dodgy deals involving an Austrian company, an Austrian bank, several diplomats from San Marino, and a Republic of San Marino ministry official that caused a minor scandal back in 2016 and that had links to money laundering and Russia. Oh, come on. This is Lies, Spies and Corporate Crimes. You didn't think the episode would somehow fail to cover money laundering, did you? Now, in this criminal complaint, filed in 2016 by the Austrian Ministry of Justice, it was alleged that a €200,000 transaction run through Austria's Reichs- orchestrated by two individuals already convicted of money laundering, Claudio Pedeschi and Biljana Beruka. Okay, hold that thought. Now, prosecutors alleged they used their San Marino company, AOL IPSP, to conceal the origins of money tied to corruption and laundered it with the help of an Austrian company, Maxima Solutions. Maxima Solutions, owned by Maximilian Habsburg Lothringen. Now set Max to one side. Prior to 2016 and that scandal involving Pedeschi and Beruka, back in 2011, the San Marino prosecutor's office had looked into the transfer of €740,000 from Montenegro to the bank accounts of their former Secretary of State, Claudio Pedeschi, and his then fiancée, Beruka. Now, Pedeschi and Beruka were subsequently arrested in June of 2015 on charges of money laundering and corruption. Following Pedeschi's arrest in San Marino, an additional €14 million were seized. And at that time, the Center for Investigative Journalism of Montenegro had revealed that Pedeschi and Beruka held two active companies in Podgorica, sharing an address of a company belonging to two, oddly, Montenegrin citizens of Greek and Malaysian origin, very odd, Petrostatis and Wei Seng Pua. Now, Pua just happened to be San Marino's ambassador to Montenegro, and also active in the gambling scene there. The two companies Pedeschi and Beruka held were Klabi, Claudio plus Pirjone equal Clubby. Isn't that cute? Which just happened to be registered in the Marshall Islands. Certainly nothing suspicious about that. And the second company, AOL IP SP. So the first case, 2011, where the San Marino public prosecutor accused Podesci and Baruca. In addition to them having accepted and laundered money deriving from corrupt practices, they were accused of having laundered €2.5 million of a company, Black Sea Pearl Limited, based in the BVI, and then crediting this amount of money to their current account of Clabby in San Marino. Okay, now stick with this because it's coming back to Wirecard in just a moment. During the time Podesci held the position of Deputy Minister in San Marino, Baruca, that's the fiancé, was Managing Director of AOL IPSP San Marino, along with another partner in AOL IPSP. The company, AB Capital Group Limited, which operated in the, quote, financial and technology sectors in Switzerland and Russia. Now, AOL IPSP's other 50% of share capital was held equally by Podesci and an Israeli, Yosef Gershon. Now, Gershon just happened to be Israel's ambassador to San Marino. Oof, nothing like a little diplomatic immunity, eh? So we have Pua, Gershon, and Podesci, all diplomats. AOL IPSP claimed it was a payment processing company. Now your ears are pricked up. Gershon was said to have given Baruca, together with a representative for AB Capital, special power of attorney for the foundation of a company in San Marino. That company, AOL IPSP, by virtue of which AOL IPSP would become the owner of an industrial license for financial services. What does that mean? Prosecutors produced documents evidencing relationships between AOL IPSP with other AOL IPSP companies active in the field of online payments in Cyprus and Switzerland, as well as with the Russian banking and financial system. In fact, there were references in the documents to a project that was called San Marino Bank Project. This so-called project entailed financial resources being procured through Russian investors with the aim of exercising control over the aforementioned companies through the acquisition of a bank in San Marino. And what do I always tell you? The best way to launder money is to own a bank. Now, the Swiss arm of AOL IPSP, according to corporate documents in Switzerland, was established to process credit card payments via the internet. And AB Capital Group Limited, the other half of AOL IPSP, they claim to be engaged in consulting, naturally, financial services and technology. And they have operations in Israel, Thailand, Russia, Switzerland, and the Philippines, among other locations. Doesn't this sound familiar? Now, who do we know that does credit card and payment processing in Southeast Asia and has ties to Forex in Israel? I know it'll come to me any moment now, and there's a nexus to Russia. Oh, do remind me. Enter the Austrians. Whilst investigating the aforementioned questionable activities of Podesci and Baruca and AOL IPSP, prosecutors observed money flowing from Habsburg Lothringen's Maxima Solutions into AOL IPSP accounts. In fact, Maxima had transferred €200,000 from an account it had opened at Reichslandesbank to AOL IPSP, ostensibly for consultancy services. Why? Involving Maxima seeking to purchase a banking license an acquisition of a European commercial bank on behalf of some Russians. Only, as the San Marino investigators noted, the acquisition of the bank would have taken place with funds whose origin would have, had to remain strictly untraced and unidentified, thanks to the use of third parties. And 7 months after that $200,000 euro payment, a consulting agreement between the managing partners of the company Maxima, that's Habsburg Lothringen, and Baruka, and a Russian named Marina Bekova. Now, by virtue of this contract, Maxima authorized AOL IPSP, which supposedly offered such services, to identify investment opportunities within the Republic of San Marino, or to report on the possibilities of participation in companies based in San Marino. And just to clarify, Maxima Solutions, it's really the family business office for the Habsburg Lothringians. And at the basis of the assignment of Maxima to AOL IPSP, there was, as it turned out, a mandate from another Russian, Marina Vasilyevna Mamontova, an expert in Russian banking law, consulting to Maxima. And tied into the Habsburg Lothringen and the AOL IPSP matter, Igor Kuznetsov and Andrei Zakonska. Igor is linked as an officer or director to a dozen or more prepaid card and forex entities stretching around the globe, including CG Pay, Nolamix Trading, Cyprus naturally, and AB Capital, the other partner. It too has links to forex and online payment processing with related entities in Cyprus and other locations that are familiar to us already. Oh, isn't it a small world? Let's all sing it together, shall we? So fast forward to the second scandal involving Pedeschi and Baruka in 2016. In 2017, the San Marino Prosecutor's Office issued an MLAT to Austria seeking assistance in obtaining further documentation and cooperation around those involved in this Pedeschi-Baruka set of transactions. But unfortunately, the Austrian Ministry of Justice didn't accept the request. And you know who was running the Austrian Ministry of Justice at the time. No, San Marino investigators were forced to suspend the investigation. Now, why would the Austrian Ministry of Justice not want to follow up on this request involving Maximilian Habsburg Lothringen? Well, let's take a look at that owner of Maxima Solutions. Maximilian Habsburg Lothringen Erzherzog von Österreich, to use his full name. Let's just call him Max for the sake of expediency. And just to put this in context, Daddy is head of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine. And Max's cousin? Oh, this will be a familiar name. Nicholas von Rintelen. That's right. Both Max and Nicky are descendants of Friedrich Wilhelm III, King of Prussia, and his union with Queen Louise, Duchess of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Nicky's mother is Countess von Merenberg, the last of the patrilineal line of the House of Nassau. That ties her to historic German, Luxembourg, and Russian royal houses. And another thing to recall about Nicky's mummy. Remember, she served as chairwoman of the Hessian-Russian Intercultural Exchange Organization. And Max? Active in the Austrian-Russian Friendship Society. And remember, Nicky is connected to Jan Marsalik's company Virtual Solutions AG. Connected to Nicky? Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, he who was booted from his role as Minister of Economic Affairs for Germany for plagiarizing his grad school dissertation. And zu Guttenberg? He's the son of a German countess, also an old aristocratic family, also tied to the von Marenbergs and old Friedrich. In fact, Gutenberg's mummy, the countess who remarried Adolf Henkel von Ribbentrop, yes, that one, Hitler's foreign minister, but Karl Theodor also married a countess from the von Bismarck family. And Countess von Bismarck? Cousin to Max and Nicky. So Max and Nicky are related twice over, and then to Gutenberg via his marriage to their cousin. It's a family affair. It's a family affair. It's funny. A friend of mine, I mentioned this to, speculated out loud and wondered, had the Habsburg fortunes failed? Perhaps that's why they're shopping for banks for Russians out of the family office, Maxima Solutions. So now, just as a quickie reminder, Zu Gutenberg served as a lobbyist to the consultancy Augustus Intelligence and worked as a lobbyist and consultant to Wirecard. Zu Gutenberg is the one that obtained access for German Minister of Economics Peter Altmaier's participation at the Munich Security Conference in 2019 via his, let's use air quotes, shall we, consulting firm Spitzberg Partners. This is the same security conference Marsalek came to via Gutenberg and Marsalek's Austrian intelligence contacts. You see, Zu Gutenberg and the BVT folks also know one another. Nicky also attended said conference and was besties with Marsalek. Isn't this a tight, cozy little group? Don't forget, Nicky's company, Virtual Solutions, is the one that sold the encryption software to German intelligence, the one that Austria's parliament is now so upset about because it appears they may also have serviced Austrian intelligence. And of course, in addition to Marsalek and Braun belonging to the ORFG, the Austrian-Russian Besties Club, along with Max, Nicky is believed to have given money to it. God, next we're going to find out Marsalek is the bastard offspring of one of these idiots. Nicky is also tied to Marsalek through IMS Capital Partners and a web of companies involving Russian Alexander Vuchak. Now, meanwhile, back at the ORFG, Gutenberg, across both Wirecard and Augustus, is quite telling, because examining Gutenberg's connections with Wirecard and Augustus Intelligence, one can identify a web that connects him with active and former politicians, heads of state and governments, businesses, startups, investors, and Russian spies across both Germany and Austria. And the ORFG 2011 to 2015 was headed up by Ludwig Scharringer. You know Scharringer's name for his having headed up the dirty Austrian bank Raiffeisen, former bank to Dmitry Firtash, whom after he got the boot from Raiffeisen, per the regulators, Wirecard began banking. And of course, the ORFG also ties into this lot with Johann Gudnes of the Austrian FPO, and we've already discussed Gudnes's substantive connections to Marsalek. Now we can add Max playing with Russians to move money to a credit card and payment processing company with links to Southeast Asia, Israel, and Eastern Europe. Now, because of all that, let's not leave an update out on Vladimir Putin's little buddy Firtash, right? Dmitry. In early November, or just a few weeks ago, Austrian members of parliament began questioning the Ministry of Justice. Specifically, they observed that back in 2019, the Austrian Supreme Court had approved Firtash's extradition to the US, where he's wanted to answer the charges of money laundering and corruption. Firtash's lawyer, Dieter Baumdorfer, had filed a last-minute appeal staying the extradition by seeking to reopen the case. Now, unfortunately for Firtash, and I say unfortunately, in the sense that the overwhelming evidence against him just keeps cropping up, with the ICIJ's release of the FinCEN files, additional questionable transactions, read laundering, became known to the Austrians. Specifically, it appears Firtash used a Citibank account for one of his Swiss companies, Boatly Trade AG, to transfer over 650,000 to Meinl Bank in Austria and another account in the US. And if you've gone hazy on Meinl's challenges with allowing laundering to flow through its institutional vaults, go back to episode 26. Anywho, so the MPs in this inquiry draw the Ministry of Justice's attention not only to the Meinl transactions, but to a report Germany's FIU issued this past spring about an extensive roster of accounts held by Firtash at Wirecard Bank, you remember those, and then archly observed to the ministry that it seemed, well, a striking coincidence that one of Firtash's companies, a Turkish consulting firm, had invoiced, air quotes, €1.5 million to, of all places, Wirecard's UAE subsidiary. And they continued, we couldn't help but notice that whole thing shoots as landlord to Firtash connection, and oh yes, that former OVP Vice-Chancellor and Finance Minister, Michael Spindelegger, and ex-SPO Minister of the Interior Karl Schlögl, held or hold, oh yes, that's right, said the MPs, Spindelegger and Schlögl hold executive board and director positions at Firtash's company, the Agency for the Modernization of Ukraine, let's call it AMU. And see, said the inquiry committee, we can't help but question just how cosy all of these connections are, because we observe that Spindelegger, well, he is an old college buddies with the cartel brother of no less than Wolfgang Brandstätter, whom Spindelegger made, wait for it, Minister of Justice. Oh, you mean when that request came in from San Marino? Were those the years? Ugh, this is a bad smell, isn't it? Now understand, Spindelegger, he wasn't just OVP Vice-Chancellor. He's also held the roles of party chairman of the OVP, so there's a bit of power there, and he served at one time as foreign minister. Oversight of ambassadors, like Peterlich, for instance. Oh, yes, you might call Herr Spindelegger a player. So there's Spindelegger still sitting on the board of Firtash's AMU, and the Minister of Justice, who made the decision not to extradite Firtash? Well, he was appointed by then Vice-Chancellor Spindelegger, so kind of sorta owes his political crown to him. Oh, and another exec of AMU? Udo Brockhausen. Well, say the MPs, this is awkward too, but it seems Brockhausen accepted a commission from none other than Jan Marsalek. The commission, worth about €95,000, was to, quote, investigate market opportunities for Wirecard in the Ukraine related to Wirecard's core business, recording and controlling refugee flows. Oh wait, that last part, yes, that really may not accurately capture Wirecard's core business. And then it gets even smellier, because, as the Austrian MPs made a point of reminding the Minister of Justice, Firtash's lawyer, Baumdorfer, he just happens to sit in the same law firm with Ministry of Justice section head Christian Pilnacek. You know, related to the other Kurt scandals, and buddy to Brandstätter, who works with Baumdorfer's partner. The MPs highlighted two of Firtash's companies there in Austria, Hochtiefbau GmbH and Ukinvest Holdings, and said, we see both companies referenced in the US indictment, and we can't help but notice Firtash's model appears to involve conducting profitable business via a network of companies and sub-companies that are registered around the globe, not just Austria and Switzerland for tax purposes, but Cyprus, the BVI, the Seychelles. And then, in order to be able to conduct business undisturbed, Firtash seems to have this modus operandi of establishing good contacts at the highest political levels of a target country. And from there, money flows, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally. And side note, even Firtash's ex-wife thought he was a criminal and actually notified Wickster regarding her suspicions about him and his fraudulent activities. Ex-spouses always know the dirt, don't they? Now, corruption comes in so many guises. As we recognize, acts don't have to be illegal to be corrupt. Cronyism, nepotism, general venality aren't necessarily outlawed. Who know, influencing one another or helping somebody obtain a position within the political party. But they are deeply damaging. The harms to a society are many. But what of from whom a political party obtains its donation or favoritism? What of those activities? Power brokering and political self-interest, lobbying. This episode only scratches the surface of the depth of corruption that has beset Austria. Oh, sure, we have the obvious acts of treason, that's true, and there have been bribes paid and taken identified. Violations of Austria's constitution, definitely. Rules of office flouted. Gross self-interest indulged above any good for the citizens for whom these individuals are said to work. And many acts of corruption are not necessarily unlawful, but they are immoral, as we all know, they undermine trust, and they do not benefit the commons. Now, we don't have time here to debate Aristotelian philosophy, but I say to my students of anti-corruption, when you're seeking a paper, you ask me what to write about. This series of interlinked scandals at the highest levels of Austrian politics, across multiple ministries and across parties and across businesses, is a true case study. We are unlikely to see it in books and articles on political corruption because it features an advanced, well, in theory, advanced Western, again, in theory, European country. And you know, the anti-corruption community, we love nothing more than to point at Tier 2 and Tier 3 countries as wellsprings of political corruption and low rule of law. But don't mistake it for a moment. The depth and systematic levels of corruption in Austria uncovered this year will still be felt a decade from now. This is a case study worthy of a PhD dissertation. Austria at this time has surpassed Germany for sustaining the deepest and most damaging cuts from the Wirecard scandal. Career civil servants are falling like tin soldiers. A chancellor, multiple high-ranking ministerial officials, a brigadier general, a career ambassador, former ministers of justice corrupted. The complete and utter decimation of the country's intelligence services, damage to its banks, the reputation of some of its oldest families. The list and fallout continues. Some of the country's media is now controlled by the corrupt, and the country continues to harbour Firtash, and there are questions as to how Firtash obtained the deal he did. So I ask the dirty Austrians, was it worth it? You grew knotweed in the gardens of Edelweiss. Years of service to your country surrendered to venality, in some cases outright treason, and for all, the sale of integrity that's less shredded any historic positive legacy you might have left. Those are in tatters. Was it worth it? Now the hedges trimmed down and that labyrinth constantly being negotiated by Austrian politicians become visible. You know, the Parliamentary Investigative Committee is really still in the early stages. But if the goal was to disrupt and destabilize, to infiltrate and impair Austria, I'd say the Russians picked the right Austrians for the job. And that's all for this episode. Coming up in episode 2 of season 2, I'm delving deep into Henry O'Sullivan's past. We're going to have a really good time with that. And once again, the enablers rear their ugly heads. I'm Nicole Ryder-Gordon. Lies, Spies and Corporate Crimes, the Wirecard Saga. My thanks always to my producer, Tom Fox, and to the amazing Compliance Podcast Network. I'll see you back here next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.